In case we didn't make it clear enough, Cavs-Pacers Game 6 is tonight in Naptown. Staying in these, another Game 6, Raptors-Wizards in our nation's capital. But Max, which team needs to avoid a Game 7 more, Cleveland or Toronto?
It's actually my pick as Eastern Conference champions, the Toronto Raptors. You know, I think that they are going to win, but if it goes 7 games, then not only the ghosts of the past, you know, there's a psychological whammy everyone worries about, but in my view, it's more than that. It's that it will indicate that the Raptors have fallen back into the trap that at times befell them during the regular season, which is they play this excellent brand of basketball through most of the game, offense and defense. That's why for most of the season, they were a top 5 offense and defense in the NBA. They're the better team. But toward the end of games, for whatever reason, they start playing hero ball, isoing Lowry and especially DeRozan. And neither one, first of all, isoing those kind of players late in games anyway is not as good as, oh, here comes a double team, pass out of it. Get an open look somewhere, right? That's usually a better idea anyway. But particularly when your best players, the guys you're isoing, are 4-star and not 5-star players, which is DeRozan and Lowry. They're not superstars. They're all-stars. Well, let's focus on DeRozan. He's the best player on the team. He's an all-star, maybe even a 4-point something, but he ain't an MVP. He's not a 5. And so when your guy is simply not good enough to do that, it's a bad idea, but it's compounded by the fact that he ain't LeBron James, for example. The best player on the floor, in fact, in that series will be John Wall. So I like Toronto to close it out, but they need to avoid a Game 7. And Stephen A., before I even touch on the Cavs, I'll save that for you.
It's the Cavs who need to avoid a Game 7. It's not just because of the threat of anything being able to happen in the Game 7 with this anemic offense. They've been putrid. They're the worst offensive team in this postseason, averaging better than 94 points per game when you have a slew of teams averaging 110 and above. The offense has been absolutely horrific when you take that into account, along with the fact that LeBron James, the minutes that he's had to log, the things that he's had to do to come to the rescue, you just don't want that to be that taxing on his body for the second go-round, the semifinals of the Eastern Conference playoffs. You want to sit up there and get this series over with as quick as you possibly can, especially since I believe the Washington Wizards will win tonight in Chocolate City and will force a Game 7. And so because they force a Game 7, if Cleveland were to win tonight, those are additional days of rest that LeBron James and the rest of the crew will get. Maybe the offense will come together and be able to play better because of it. Most certainly, LeBron James is going to be able to enjoy some rest in that particular moment in time, because he's definitely going to have to carry the load heavily against the Toronto Raptors in the semifinals. That's the way I view it. And so it's one of those situations where when you look at it, obviously the Wizards are a threat to Toronto, and we get that. We also understand that Indiana is going to be a threat, and you can't ignore that. And you can't ignore the fact that if they walked into a Game 7 in Cleveland, they're playing with house money, which would make things exceptionally tight. But I think the biggest reason I say Cleveland as opposed to Toronto is that Toronto have enough bodies and they rely upon more than just one person in order to win these basketball games for them, whereas Cleveland doesn't have that luxury. It's LeBron or bust. It's just that simple. And because of that, you need him as fresh as you can possibly have him. You got to end it tonight.
I hear your point about, and I think it's a good one, about going forward. If we spin it forward, then, and assuming both Toronto and Cleveland get out of a Game 7 in advance, then you'd be right. Then sure, Cleveland needs it more. What I'm saying is there may not be any going forward. And just as you said, well, I'm not talking about anything can happen in a Game 7. I'm saying, let's look at what is likely to happen in a Game 7. If Toronto is forced there, it means once again likely they have played incorrectly at the end of the game. That says something bad. It says they can't exercise that demon. And in fact, they're up against a team that's just as good as them, according to this series. And that other team also has the best player on either team in John Wall. If you look at Cleveland, on the other hand, even if they get to a Game 7, if Indiana forces it, even though all the Cleveland wins have been close, the history of the NBA tells us that on this level, in a Game 7, take the team with the best player. That's LeBron James. And it's not only the best player, but when the best player is also the best player in the world, They tend not to lose game sevens in the first round to teams like Indiana. Nice team. But again, no five-star player on that team. Oladipo, like DeRozan's a four-star guy. That's the point. Yes, spinning forward. Toronto deeper. Cleveland needs to avoid game seven more going forward. I'm saying Toronto wants to go forward, right? So does Cleveland. Both those teams in a game seven, Cleveland's going to win that game seven. I'm not so sure about Toronto.
Well, remember, I picked Toronto to win in Game 7 back in Toronto before the series even began, so it's consistent with my prediction. I've always believed the series was coming down to this, and I have no reason to believe otherwise. And I also said each team would protect its home court. Nobody would win on the road.
And don't forget, guys, Utah can also close out tonight